Two dominant technologies in the wireless communications, cellular and Wi-Fi.
I think the topic is also timely because both serve a common purpose of getting people access to data and voice. Both are present in the most important device that we are carrying around with us, smartphones.
Dr. S. Srikanth is one of the renowned voice in Wi-Fi industry.
He has helped hundreds of professionals to get deep knowledge on Wi-Fi through his trainings.
He is now here to talk about cellular and Wi-Fi technologies.
People know about 4G and 5G and upcoming 6G. First thing people walk into an indoor space, they ask, what's the Wi-Fi password, right?
Where do these two technologies contrast each other?
The cellular costs are quite higher. I think Wi-Fi probably is
Hello everyone, welcome to Weekly WiFi Wisdom podcast series where we talk everything about Wi-Fi and the tech that surrounds it. I'm your host, Srikanth, a WLAN engineer at Canada Technologies, and I'm very excited about the guest that we have today. Perhaps he doesn't need any introduction. If you are learning about Wi-Fi, you would have come across his online teachings or offline trainings. I'm talking about Dr. S. Srikanth, and he is currently working as Chief Knowledge Officer at NanoCell Networks. I'm very excited that you are here today, sir. And today we'll be talking about two dominant technologies in the wireless communications, cellular and Wi-Fi. We'll be looking at similarities between both of them and the differences and how both the technologies addresses various use cases. Thank you so much for taking time, and it's a pleasure having you here.
So the pleasure is mine. As I said, thanks for the opportunity. And I think the topic is also timely because there have been some recent comparisons there. I wanted to put out more materials. So I think now you are offering me a platform with all this professional recording and so on to share some insights. And luckily, our business travels both Wi-Fi and cellular. So I think we are probably one of the few uniquely staged business house where we can comment knowledgeably on both technologies, and I hope that will come through in the discussion today.
Absolutely. Yes. So let's get started. So I'd like to understand from you, starting with the similarities that both technologies have in terms of design goals or the technical concepts. And I would also request you to introduce the terminology of the key entities in both the technologies.
When we say similarities, I think obviously both serve a common purpose of getting people access to data and voice, and I should say now high-speed data, voice, and maybe add even IoT. And both are present in the most important device that we are carrying around with us, smartphones. They have some technical similarities, but then there are, as I probably alluded to in my titles, that there are large differences as well. And sometimes comparisons are unfairly made between these two with very different goalposts. And so I think the similarities are from the fact that, as I said, what they bring to us, they are present in the smartphone segment and the ubiquitousness. So it is not just people know about 4G and 5G and upcoming 6G. I mean, any small town that you walk to in the world today, people know the first thing people walk into an indoor space and they ask, what's the Wi-Fi password, right? So in that sense, I think cellular and Wi-Fi are having a lot of similarity from that perspective, that they've become very important for managing our personal, professional, and other things. And technically, of course, terminology is like a huge area, especially in cellular.
Right.
So maybe that's something, maybe we can keep it for another day in terms of the details. But as we get further into the discussions, I think some things will come out where, we will see slightly more deeper terminology used for comparing and contrasting these two.
Right. Absolutely. Now we have talked about few similarities. Now, where do these two technologies contrast each other?
I think that's the big part, because remember the objectives of these two technologies are also very different, in the sense that um, one caters to a wide area, mobility, supporting with global footprint, handovers, license spectrum, etc. The other, the Wi-Fi, is more local centric, or applies to a small indoor space, or maybe a bigger indoor space like a campus, but then has local points through which we accomplish the connectivity. So the design goals from right from the wireless part all the way to a few other things which complete the system are quite different. And so this reflects in a variety of things. For example, the costs of your cellular solution versus the Wi-Fi solution are not the same. Um, Comparisons should be done very carefully, given that the design goals and the cost structures and the usage scenarios are very different, right?
Right.
So in that sense, technically there is lot more differences. For example, cellular has a very well defined what is called as a core network. Wi-Fi plugs into, all kinds of things like a enterprise network, plugs into a home situation. It can be set up without professional help. You and I can buy a router off the market and just plug a cable as, coming into the home, or these days even connect wirelessly backhaul
Right.
as well. Whereas a cellular base station is not going to be easy for you and me to set up, right?
Right.
So these are some of the differences, and as I said, we will get deeper as we go a little further.
Right. General question. So if I look around the devices that I have, most commonly I find Wi-Fi radio inside the device, but not the cellular interface. Why is that?
I think that's a very, I've been trying to highlight this point as well. And in fact, for example, we are members of the Bharat 6G Alliance, and we've been advocating that Wi-Fi should also be a big part of the discussions moving towards the next generation wireless interfaces or the connectivity, right? The reason why Wi-Fi gets itself into lot more devices than say cellular is simply because the cellular costs are quite higher, in the sense that if you go to a 4G, 5G chipset, the IPR costs and so on can be prohibitive. And two, remember that all that cost pays off when you have a smartphone or a mobile phone kind of usage, where you can take it around, transact on the move at high speed, etc. But if you are just a laptop or a TV sitting, in the case of a display device, you're just sitting in one place, or in the case of a laptop, while using it, you're probably, not moving around too much. You don't need all that complexity. And two is that you don't want operator tie-in, because as you know, the cellular ecosystem is primarily operator driven, and which means that you need an operator credential in the device that you typically tend to use with a cellular network. Wi-Fi doesn't require all of those things. So for a variety of reasons, the fact that, if you are mostly static and using the device, if you are not wanting to basically use an operator credentials for connecting anywhere, etc., for a variety of reasons, and the costs, because remember that ultimately all the manufacturers of consumer and related devices are always looking at the costs of adding interfaces. So Wi-Fi costs can be significantly lower, and it suits the bill for a, say, a display device or a laptop, or maybe a home IoT system, or an indoor IoT system, I should say, and a variety of devices. So that's why you will find them in not the original laptops and heading on to your display devices, but also in the TVs, the washing machines, and air conditioners and light bulbs. Maybe light bulbs a little too far off, but they are there. Smart speakers and locks and so on and so forth.
Right. Wi-Fi devices are diversifying, absolutely. And yeah, complexity of operators and cost are some of the factors why we don't see cellular interfaces very often on multiple devices. Yeah, so this is from an online reading. So I've read online that the base station in cellular network takes more of a centralized access of the network, whereas it is more decentralized in Wi-Fi. So what does these two different approaches bring in terms of implementation?
So I think this is the crux of the problem when it comes to the radio related matters, or what we call radio resource management. This is a term used in both technologies but very different connotations, because in the cellular world operating predominantly in the licensed spectrum, remember that the operators put in a lot of money. In fact, most of the costs of an operator are generally spectrum related. Equipment costs are much lesser, as I'm told, in many countries, if not all, right? So clearly, for the amount that they've paid in spectrum, they want to be in control of the spectrum and use it according to what they think is best, right?
Yeah.
And leverage it for their business sort of revenues. So it means that they need the radio related controls to be in their hands, and which is the entity closest to the wireless part, which is the base station. So practically speaking, for the spectrum that they have bought, and to assure the services and to decide whom to give something as a radio resource, the base station becomes the central node for handling all the radio resource management. Of course, you can have some centralized entity of multiple base stations also contributing to that. Those are implementation aspects. Coming to Wi-Fi, it's a very different story. The spectrum is free because it's unlicensed band, and we deploy it in our homes, maybe in a small office. Need not be even an IT admin, an employee could deploy it. Like, I'm sure some of you are already deploying it for your office and maybe friends. So for all these reasons, and the fact that this is a consumer item where we can go and buy it in electronic shops, order online. So it has to be simple, it has to be easy to manage, and unlicensed band, it's very difficult for us to control access. You can put all the logic you want, but remember that unlicensed band doesn't give you the leverage ultimately, even if you have all the smarts. So a variety of reasons like these, where the access point costs, configuration, usability, unlicensed spectrum, the real power of scheduled access, all this makes difficult for us to implement scheduled access in Wi-Fi. And in fact, the 802.11 standards does have a scheduled access MAC access mechanism called point coordination function, which practically has had no implementation. So we worked on the what we call distributed channel access or coordination function and its extensions, and that has served us well. And people sometimes think, oh, Wi-Fi is not scheduled, but remember that there are pros and cons, and we must look at it carefully. We can't buy a 5G or a 4G base station and put it at home. Even if we put it at home, trust me, configuration and managing that will be a headache. Again, somebody else has to do the job, whereas a Wi-Fi access point is almost plug and play these days, right? So for many of these reasons, I think the scheduled and unscheduled kind of operations suit them.
Right.
In fact, the cellular people have tried to come to the unlicensed spectrum by introducing what they call license assisted access in LTE world and 5G NR unlicensed, etc. It has not gone very far in the marketplace.
Okay. Yeah. So far from the discussion, I understand that cellular is a bit more complex from implementation and deployment point of view, right?
But then yes, it's extremely complex. So that's why the comparisons are not fair enough, because cellular has a lot of tuning before you can get the correct performance. That is why the operators and the vendors supplying to them spend a lot of time, effort, money, etc. Fine tuning that, and it's a continuous process. And right from the protocol design to the deployment, fine tuning is extremely complex. But you take the case of, I'm taking the simplest case for a home Wi-Fi network. We probably just connect it and leave it there. Yes, these days there are home Wi-Fi management platforms from ISPs, but they are nowhere near complex as the cellular.
Yes. Right. And what does this show us the difference where the cellular takes the total control? So does it do better in terms of QoS or latency management, things like that, compared to Wi-Fi?
Definitely. I think you get what you uh, sort of, put in, pay for, etc. As I said, as I've justified, the cellular scheduled access mechanisms does give the infrastructure a lot more leverage over managing things at minute level. As I said, it's not just at the radio level, it can be back-end level as well. Remember, there's an elaborate core network behind the scenes, which also comes into play. So definitely, yes. So as you know, cellular networks started with voice as their primary service.
Right from the start.
Right. 2G was all about voice with SMS as the added service, right? So a voice network basically it was emulating our old landline telephone networks without the wires. That is the context. So to carry voice, carrier grade voice, you need very tight control because voice can be extremely sensitive to latency and jitter. That's where it started. And then of course voice is still, even in these days of people saying not talking to each other, voice still remains a very dominant service, despite all the high speed advertisements we see. I think people, if you remove voice from cellular, I think you will feel the pinch, right? Especially if you take a country like India where we are sitting. I think voice is still a huge service, and I'm sure rest of the world. So to provide services like voice, you need very good engineering of the whole network, including the wireless part, which is where the centralized scheduled control comes in and plays a big role. Wi-Fi, on the other hand, has come from the other side, which is primarily data-only network in the early days, because that's where it started. Corporate network, maybe Ethernet replacements, etc. And then only recently, voice, the cellular voice in the form of Wi-Fi calling has come in. And we don't do anything radically different for voice, I would say, in Wi-Fi. There are QoS mechanisms in Wi-Fi, but it's a question mark as to how well they do as compared to cellular voice. So regarding control of the medium, right from radio all the way, I think cellular is definitely a notch up, but that's what it's built for.
Okay.
And Wi-Fi is built for different things, and we know the pros and cons in terms of the costs and complexity, etc., etc.
Right. So the origins are different. So cellular design from voice in perspective right from the beginning, but that's not the case with Wi-Fi. Okay. So now talking about scheduled and unscheduled access between cellular and Wi-Fi. So how are the medium access rules different between both the technologies?
Okay, so in the cellular world, literally every generation has augmented the medium access rules in the sense that it's one centralized control. Both, remember, downlink and uplink are centralized control. So we started, for example, forget the 1G days. If you start from the 2G, which is where it became really global, we've had TDMA plus FDMA, we had CDMA plus FDMA, then 3G became more CDMA oriented, 4G became OFDMA oriented. So the multiple access scheme, which is a big thing in cellular, because you're dealing with large numbers of people to whom you will have to provide some tight guaranteed services like voice to start with, especially during busy hours. So it's a major challenge. The multiple access scheme is what you call the most important innovation that the wireless part of the standard typically has evolved, right? Only between the 4G and the 5G times, we've had a consolidation of OFDMA, and going ahead to 6G, we still think that OFDMA might be there as a multiple access technique, right? So in that sense, the generations have basically augmented the multiple access techniques, as I've mentioned. Wi-Fi from day one has been CSMA CA based,
Right.
with some enhancements on top, right? That has not changed to this day, though people might think that Wi-Fi 6 is centralized access and OFDMA is there. It's all on top of CSMA CA. So the bedrock of multiple access in Wi-Fi is still CSMA CA, and it's distributed control. So I think this Wi-Fi has not changed. And remember that cellular also, and I've kept stressing in some of the videos I put out, cellular every generation also usually goes for new spectra. So they don't have an interoperability problem at the radio level between generations. When I say interoperability, I should correctly say it's a coexistence. Whereas in Wi-Fi, we don't get spectrum just because we moved from Wi-Fi 6 to 7 or 7 to 8. So all generations are existing in, for example, 2G you have multiple generations, in 5G you have multiple generations, and now in the 6 gigahertz also we have multiple generations.
Right.
So the coexistence of multiple generations even on the same network is a very unique challenge, and that's where the bedrock of CSMA-CA comes in. All generations can basically coexist smoothly, and that's by the fact that we don't get new spectrum every generation.
Right.
Okay.
This gets me to another question. So, since the base station in cellular controls every uplink or downlink transmission, does that have more signaling overhead?
Yes. So typically, as I said, cellular is a very complex system at multiple levels, and if I take even the radio level, there is a separate control protocol called RRC, radio resource control. So this is a very complex protocol, and yes, typically there is overheads, but remember cellular also pays a lot of attention to any wastage of radio resources because it's licensed spectrum. So any extra hertz that they would have to consume is thought of very carefully. So in principle, they try to do a lot of things from a control perspective, but they do it very smartly so that one doesn't see that affecting their actual spectrum usage too much, because if it does, then you're going to suffer from the capacity. And remember, nobody pays for control directly, it's an indirect payment, and licensed spectrum is the biggest cost and the biggest uncertainty for operators practically the world over. So complexity is there, but it is thought of very nicely, and I would say it's almost in fact, as I'm talking to students, etc., one of the things which doesn't come through in the education curriculum is control plane design. Right? I mean, practically, if you walk to an engineering college or a engineering course, hardly people will not know. Okay, they know that 4G and 5G carry 100 megabits or 1 gigabit, whatever it is. But there is a huge control plane which gone on, as you said, to manage things. Right? And that is, I think, some of the key engineering aspects as well.
Right. Let's talk about the 5 layer of both OFDM, 5 layer of cellular and Wi-Fi. So both use OFDM techniques and they are increasingly relying on MIMO. So how do they differ in 5 layer mechanisms, particularly in terms of modulation and encoding schemes or the feedback mechanisms? How are they estimating channel conditions, things like that?
The OFDM parameters are quite different between the cellular. As you know, cellular started with OFDM only in 4G. Wi-Fi started with OFDM way back. So in that sense, I think one of the points you had mentioned is that where did one pick sort of technology earlier? OFDM was picked up by Wi-Fi way back in the standardization of 802.11a, end of 99. Cellular came to OFDM only in the 4G evolution in the form of OFDM-A. As I said, for them all things have to translate to multiple access. For us, OFDM remained as plain OFDM in the Wi-Fi world. Now the parameters are different because one is a mobile outdoor multipath oriented system, whereas the Wi-Fi world is indoor, smaller ranges, basically static, at best walking speeds. So these drive the parameters to different values. Initially, the spectrum of operation when 802.11a was specified, we were in 5 gigahertz. And there, of course, we must remember the accuracy of the RF equipment, the costs associated with that, all that drove certain parameters. So though they share some underlying technology like OFDM, the parameter space is quite different. And Wi-Fi started with OFDM with CSMA-CA as the technique. The extension to OFDMA came in Wi-Fi 6. But remember, OFDMA does not imply no CSMA-CA. That's a wrong assumption, right? The CSMA-CA remains the bedrock on which you can do something extra on top.
Right.
Cellular is because you don't need to do any carrier sensing or listen before talk in licensed spectrum. OFDMA remains very different in the cellular implementation. It's highly successful for a good reason, because a centralized scheduling mechanism which controls downlink and uplink with the ability to tweak the time and frequency domains in a very smart way. I think that has been the success story of OFDMA on the cellular side. MIMO and OFDM are also a very good combination because of the way things happen, and both have leveraged. In fact, again, I would say Wi-Fi jumped the gun, because in 11N, which came in 2005 odd time frame, brought in MIMO as almost a very important part of the Wi-Fi 5. Cellular took some time. 4G was where they brought in the MIMO aspect, but now both rely quite heavily on MIMO, moving towards a multi-user MIMO context, and so on and so forth.
Right. And these days I'm hearing about massive MIMO in cellular. So what numbers are we talking there?
So the massive MIMO framework in cellular right now is about hundreds of TXRX. They would call it as 128T, 128R, 64T, 64. So we are somewhere in that bracket, moving towards 256. If everything becomes successful, then maybe we'll jump to higher frequency 1000. There was another point you had, I didn't properly reply to in the previous comment, which is the feedback mechanisms.
Right.
See, cellular 5MAC has always relied on very detailed feedback, closed loop mechanisms for all the link adaptation or rate adaptation, for a good reason, because wide area, mobile, licensed spectrum, you better get it right, right? Wi-Fi, and this has been, people have complained that, oh, cellular has the CQI mechanism, which is one of the standouts, etc. Wi-Fi doesn't have it. But remember that Wi-Fi is, basically not having that variability in channel conditions over time. It can afford to do an open loop adaptation. Closed loop adaptation schemes have been proposed in the standard, but it is not taken off in an interoperable manner. So open loop adaptation has worked. I think that's what we need to be very clear about. Both have, I think, similar modulation and coding choices put in. These days the numbers are almost similar. Feedback mechanisms, for a good reason, are very tight in cellular. Deliberately open, because remember, there is costs of feedback as well, costs from multiple angles. And people who comment that we should ape cellular feedback mechanisms should think about the costs of that, and to check whether is Wi-Fi faltering in this front in a significant percentage of the cases, and my gut feeling is it probably is not.
Can you share us one example where each technology is better than the other in 5 design?
As I said, the cellular world basically takes what we call mobility into account, the Doppler associated effects, the smart scheduling framework, where from 4G onwards, in fact towards the end of 3G itself, but 4G I think formally, where we have scheduling times of 1 milliseconds or even lower. To me, that's really the crux, the use of the frequency time in a very intelligent way. This is really a nice case study for anybody wanting to look at how do you engineer something to attack a problem with multiple users, with differing requirements, moving around, all around the cell. To me, that's the highlight of the cellular, especially I think 4G is a very elegant design, right? Using the OFDMA framework with the scheduling and so on and so forth. Wi-Fi, I think, so the right way to compare is what do we need, because almost what is not taught maybe also in an engineering kind of curriculum is that you don't need what you call fancy things everywhere, right? In fact, the ideal business solution is to have the right fitting technology from a variety of senses, including the cost complexity equation, maybe power consumption as well in many cases, I think Wi-Fi probably is more geared towards finding that fit for the indoor, low mobility, cost sensitive market context. So the use of OFDM plus MIMO, but the fact that we interplay with multiple generations in a band with a common 5 preamble start, I think these are really elegant designs which are not maybe talked about too much. Okay.
Right. So Wi-Fi backward compatibility is its strength.
Right. Excellent.
You talked about mobility. So how elegant are these two technologies when handling roaming scenarios between the access points in Wi-Fi versus between the base stations in cellular?
I think that's a bad case for the Wi-Fi folks, because as you know, cellular is centralized, a lot of thought of control plane, and with mobility from multiple angles taken to account. So obviously it hangs down, it does much better, right? From so many angles, because it's the base station or the radio resource control which decides when handover should happen, what kind of measurements trigger handover, what to be reported, all kinds of details. So obviously it's complex, but it's designed for that, right?
Right from the start, like what?
Right from the start. That's why, in fact, always one should, it will appear, sort of what you call foolish when you think about certain goals at some stage. But when people during those late 80s were talking about, oh, we will be moving in a car at 60 kilometer per hour and talking, especially sitting in India, for example, you wonder, I mean, we don't even have a landline phone at that time, right? And even in the West, cellular was not very popular. It was used mostly by business customers. And I recall the story to a friend some time back, saying that 1995 or so, I remember there was an executive from, I think, an operator who spoke about it and says, look, cellular, all these fancy things we talk about, the real tipping point is when, my son or my family calls from the supermarket and said, the bread is 10% cheaper here than there. That will be the tipping point when everybody will have a phone. I mean, today, in a country like India, where we did not have great landline penetration, I mean, look at how mobile has, to a certain extent, transformed lives, right? So right from the first day, people thought about a variety of things. So 2G is a landmark design in mobile telephony, right? Because the way they went about building that system, of course, voice oriented. We have to keep that in mind. But it was amazing as to how, mobility from, handover, a variety of things were taken, very good control of, right? Now, coming to Wi-Fi. So remember that in the initial days, Wi-Fi was mostly in devices, computing devices like laptops. Smartphones came a little later. They didn't move so much, the laptops or computing devices. So mobility was, not thought of in a big way, and it was mostly best effort applications. So you could just reconnect, or what we call reassociate in our language of Wi-Fi. Things started changing when we got smartphones, where people would, do real-time traffic like voice. Nowadays, after COVID, I think we are all roaming around the home also with our Meet, Zooms and Teams, whatever we have on our phones for audio and screen sharing, whatever it is. So it's becoming important for real-time services to move smoothly across access points in a home, in an enterprise, in a campus kind of scenario. But because the controls, as you have indicated earlier, everything in cellular was designed with centralized control. In Wi-Fi, it was deliberately to keep it light, and for all the things that we talked about, it was left distributed. Most of the things were left distributed, including the choice of whom to move to, when to move, under what conditions. I think that still remains to the day, despite all the advances that we have brought on. Clients still remain or the so-called bosses of the roaming.
Right.
And that will have some effects, because some clients do something, some clients don't do something, and we always get complaints from customers where the clients, suddenly do something which we didn't expect. Software upgrades can change things. So mobility is still, I think, a challenging matter for Wi-Fi. Maybe non-real-time applications, we don't care so much. But since real-time applications are involved, I think Wi-Fi 8 is trying a next level where they can see some enhancements. It's not that there are no efforts in standards, no efforts in products, but the philosophy of giving control to the clients as well to manage the radio resources has its price.
Right. So Wi-Fi 8, as you mentioned, is it doing something to address these challenges?
There is, as I said, something where they're trying to make the roaming a little bit more seamless. In fact, it's called seamless mobility domain or something like that. So there are some efforts being put in. How much it will address all the problems, time will tell. But it's, remember, in Wi-Fi we do have a large legacy base. In fact, I feel that one of the things we lose sight of is that in Wi-Fi, legacy is becoming much more important. It was always important, but it's important because the number of older devices which are in our network and through which we do a lot of access is probably going to be a significant percentage of the devices in the network. So that it may not have a huge effect there. So we might have to live with some teething problems in Wi-Fi with respect to mobility.
Right.
Not all clients, but some clients.
Some clients, yes.
Yes.
Now let's talk about collaboration. So where are these two technologies collaborating with each other? What are specific use cases where these two are going hand in hand with each other?
The collaboration efforts mostly have come from 3GPP. I haven't seen much from the IEEE 802.11 standards. Because the cellular world is dominated by operators, which is the cellular service providers to be accurate, their interest has been only on the smartphone, obviously, because that's the device where there is a SIM card and basically you have Wi-Fi and cellular access possibilities. There have been lots of efforts, mostly not so much on the radio side, but more towards bringing the traffic into the cellular core network, but through the Wi-Fi radio interface wherever it's convenient. For example, if you maybe go to a airport or a mall, your operator might have access points to which you will seamlessly move on to the Wi-Fi part without maybe you having to do anything. This has been the best extent of collaboration I think we can see from that perspective. Internal to the device, there might be a little bit more in the sense that the device chooses Wi-Fi to send traffic whenever it finds a good secure Wi-Fi. So those are completely implementation oriented, maybe from the operating systems of the devices, etc. Deeper collaboration has been explored. For example, 5G has a little bit more. I have not seen many operators talking about that, right? So right now, I would say the collaboration at a level where you can see the benefits of both in some interesting ways, like how you saw in some time in the 4G era. I'm not seeing great advances there, right? I think we should recognize the place for Wi-Fi in the ecosystem and see how best it can serve the ultimate user. Of course, things like Wi-Fi calling, for example, have also happened without much of a push from the standards, right? They just happened organically by people seeing the benefits of that in indoor spaces and so on. But from a standardized perspective, the more important ones has been tunneling of the Wi-Fi. Basically traffic coming through Wi-Fi into the cellular core networks and so on.
Understood. So this is about the future. So looking into the future, what innovations do you anticipate from both the networks, technologies? Sorry.
They both are somewhat mature, both the cellular space and the Wi-Fi space. So one has to carefully, obviously there is a business need to keep on drumming up next generation and shouting about whatever attracts eyeballs. That will happen. But I think we are plateauing in terms of true innovations. And we have to recognize that and look deeper. See, I think one of the things is that connectivity is so important today in the world, even for anybody, right? whether it is for your work or personal, or these days for showing proof of identity, transactions for which you might need connectivity to progress. So these are, I think, connectivity is becoming very crucial for us to really navigate the world around us. And of course, IoT all around us, indoors through Wi-Fi, outdoors through cellular, is slowly going to connect things, not just people and their devices. So I think these are fundamental technologies now. So I think the problems, if the true problems are, how do we make it really resilient? How do we make it available to many people, if not all, at almost all settings? So imagine, outdoors we go anywhere, we should get selective, say cellular connectivity. Indoors we walk into any space, can we get Wi-Fi connectivity? And can that be seamless? Cellular is somewhat seamless. As long as you have the right subscription, you can walk into any country and you can get seamlessly connected. Wi-Fi still has teething problems where open roaming like initiatives are trying to address. But I think if we can get to a situation where we can provide reliable, seamless, secure connectivity, I think it's an understated problem this is, because it has become so important. I think speeds are already pretty decent. Enough technology has gone into getting the speeds and some latency numbers, all those up. If we can address this problem of making sure we have ubiquitous connectivity through these two technologies and maybe other allied technologies as well for certain applications, I think that serves the world much better than an extra 10% on the throughput side, or and so on and so forth.
I totally agree. So consistent connectivity and presence of the technology so that you can actually connect anywhere in the world. So these are the two things that Srikanth is anticipating from both the technologies. I'd like to conclude with this question. So among the two technologies, which one do you think is better?
Actually, there is, for me, no need to pick sides. Of course, from a business perspective, we have equal business in both. And I think both, as I've said, really should never be thought of as competition. I think they are truly one of the few complementary technologies that we have for connecting people to, as I said, it's so important now. Connect, even in a country like India, for example, connectivity is so crucial for people at multiple levels, right? Even the poorest of poor today need to show the proof of something through some connected medium. I think we need to realize the importance of these things and use both technologies intelligently, not pick sides, not fight over who does what. There is, of course, licensed spectrum need, there is unlicensed spectrum need. I think we need to see how to, as I said, really no pick. I think both need to serve the users, as I have said, in a seamless, secure, ubiquitous manner. And as I said, coming from a developing world, I think we also need to make it frugal and make sure that it reaches the bottom of the pyramid. Everybody should be able to use it and not have to break their back for a 5G subscription or getting Wi-Fi connection, etc. So I hope those things somehow get articulated and translated into the various programs, right from the standards to government initiatives to many other things which are possible, so that this connectivity through these, at least these two, I think, are very important connectivity technologies, apart from a few other things as well. So I think there is no sides to pick here. And luckily, our business interests are also aligned to that. We have almost 50-50 business on both sides. We track all the Wi-Fi standards, we track the cellular standards. And so I'm very happy that I'm somewhat of a neutral party in this game. And I enjoy the way both have gone about improving the technology and related aspects. I think if only we can get one more step ahead and address some of the things I talked about, and it will be great.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think we are done with the questions. So if you have any conclusion remarks, probably you can address the audience, then we'll conclude.
I think most of your questions probably brought out the essence of what I wanted to say. I think there needs to be more education on the Wi-Fi cellular, similarities, differences. I think we need to appreciate each of them in their own domains rather than trying to compare, and contrast. I think they're truly complementary technologies, and that way I hope that, as I said, if we can use them, in an appropriate manner, I think we can get to some very interesting points. And I hope
Absolutely.
that's the message I want to get through.
Right. Thank you so much for your time, Srikanth. So it's a very valuable session. At least I've got some insights on how, at least the motives and origins of both the technologies and how they are complementing each other and what needs to be done in the future. So thank you so much for your time. Right. As I said, it's a pleasure having you and talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Pleasure is all mine. And keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for watching. So if you find the episode useful, please do like, share, subscribe. If you have any questions to Srikanth, you can leave them in the comments below. Follow for more. Thank you so much.